Now call to order the regular council meeting Monday, December 8, 2025 at 5 p.m. I'd like to start with our land acknowledgement that we respectfully acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the unceded ancestral territory of the Silks, Okanagan peoples, and the Splatsin of the Secwepemc Nation. Next, I'll be looking for an adoption of the agenda that the December 8th, 2025 regular council meeting agenda be adopted as circulated. Councillor Todd, seconded by Councillor Valstar. All those in favor? Carried. And that the November 17th, 2025 regular council meeting minutes be adopted as circulated. Councillor Valstar and Councillor Drapula, thank you. All those in favor? This too shall be carried. And we'll move right into our presentation of reports. Mr. Martins regarding reserve and surplus funds policy rewrite.
Thank you, Your Worship. Essentially, the purpose of a reserve policy is to formalize council guidelines for managing reserve funds. And the reason why there's a rewrite that's being proposed in front of you tonight is that the existing policy is quite old and out of date and doesn't show all of the reserves that we are currently using today. As well, it doesn't show the detail that adequately enables staff to manage reserve funds on a year-by-year basis. So the rewrite that is being proposed covers all three different types of reserves that we have, namely the statutory reserves, which are formal reserves that have been established by bylaw, as well as the operating reserves, which are more informal and do not have a bylaw that enforces them, as well as accumulated surplus, essentially, which is the default destination for any unallocated surplus funds. They automatically go there. So we will be covering in the new policy that's being proposed all three of these different types of reserves. So going right into the attachment for the proposed rewrite. In the proposed new policy, there are 5 overarching objectives that provide some overall context in what we're looking at with this policy. In addition, the policy does govern stipulated balances for a couple of the reserves that we will look at shortly. The policy also governs how interest is calculated and the frequency of interest. The interest on statutory reserves is calculated monthly based on the weighted average return of the city's overall investments. Interest on operating reserves and surpluses are not calculated. The policy also provides an overview of the 2 times per year that reporting is done to council and to the public, and those 2 times are during the financial planning process, which is scheduled for next Monday. And the second time of the year is actual reserve balances that are reported shortly after the year-end audit. So that is all captured in the new reserve. In addition, operating surplus distribution is being added to the reserve as a way to enable staff to automatically deal with operating surpluses rather than coming to council every year getting authorization for such allocations. So the reserve itself, or the policy itself, is broken down into a matrix, which I will go through. So for the first bylaw, which is 1385, that is the Municipal Statutory Reserve Fund. That has a number of sub-reserves attached to it, but it all rolls up into that bylaw. For the Roads and Drainage Infrastructure Reserve, there are 3 funding sources that are shown there: budgeted transfers, the proceeds of the annual infrastructure tax levy, and what is being proposed is 1/2 of actual annual general operating surpluses, excluding policing, joint services, and building inspection. And the reasons for those will become apparent momentarily. But the 1/2 of those annual surpluses, it is being proposed to automatically go into this reserve, and the other half into accumulated surplus that we will see shortly. Funding sources, we covered funding uses. Essentially, this reserve is meant for any kind of infrastructure renewal relating to roads, transportation, drainage, all the items that are shown on the table there. For the water and sewer reserve, incoming funding is from budgeted transfers as well as 1/2 of actual water and sewer operating surpluses. And allowable uses, according to the policy, would be any kind of water or sewer project. Public works equipment, this is again meant for replacement of existing public works fleet. So 4 different funding sources: budgeted transfers, proceeds from the sale of surplus equipment and vehicles, as well as trade-in allowances. If that were to happen, that trade-in allowance would be credited to the reserve, as well as any insurance settlements if the need ever arose. Uses would be vehicles and equipment purchases for public works. Fire protection gets its funding from budgeted transfers, as well as any city's share of insurance settlements of any fire vehicles that are damaged or written off. The use of this reserve is for the city's share of the fire department project costs. So it's not just for equipment, but it's for any kind of fire department project. Parks and Recreation gets its funding from budgeted transfers, as well as the annual recreation tax levy. So this is a parcel tax that is $20 per parcel, and currently it provides approximately $47,000 in annual revenue. So that amount automatically goes over to that reserve. Its uses are for the city's share of the joint Parks and Recreation project costs, but also for our own tot lot and trail and other parks related projects. So moving down, we have the building replacement reserve, gets its funding from just budgeted transfers. Replacement of any city-owned building not related to water, sewer, parks, and joint services. So any other building not relating to that. It can also be used for any kind of demolition or hazard assessment project costs. The gas tax reserve, this is the federal money that we receive from the federal government, and it has gone through a couple of name changes over the last couple of decades, but currently it is called the Canada Community Building Fund, but it still is commonly known as gas tax, so we kept that name there. So that is the proceeds from those payments go directly to this reserve. What staff is proposing is that the money can be used for any project permitted under the current gas tax agreement, but not related to water or sewer. Officially, we can use it for water or sewer, but staff is proposing that as far as this policy goes, that we do not use it for water and sewer, just because historically the pinch point for funding has been largely roads and drainage related. So it would make sense to reserve these funds for roads and drainage and not for water and sewer. Cemetery Reserve receives its funding through budgeted transfers every year. It is used for the city's share of cemetery projects. The Environmental Reserve is a reserve that has a little bit of funding left in it. This is the old program in which the province paid the city annual carbon tax rebates years ago. There is a little bit of money still left in that reserve, but no new funding is coming for that one. In place of that, the new program called the Provincial Climate Action Fund has a separate reserve just for that, and that is incoming money from the new program. It can be used for any kind of carbon emission reduction project as permitted by that program from the province. And the reason why it's kept separate is because the new program has time limits imposed by the province. So the incentive for us is to use that money first, and then the old program funding doesn't have an expiry date, so that can be used secondarily. The next bylaw is 1386. That's the Capital Works Reserve Fund. There is only one reserve associated with this bylaw, and that's the cash in lieu of parkland acquisition. This is funded through one of two ways: contributions received from developers for cash in lieu of providing parkland. So this is a legislative vehicle that is in the Local Government Act. So any kind of developer proceeds automatically go into this reserve. As well, this reserve can get funding from the net proceeds of sale or disposal of parkland. It is unlikely that would ever happen, but if it does, that is a legislative requirement there. Funding use is very restrictive. Legislatively, we can only use this money for parkland purchases. So this is not park improvements, but purchases of actual parkland. Bylaw 1388 is for policing. This was established many years ago in anticipation that someday Armstrong would hit 5,000 population and have to start paying directly for policing. So we are well into that now. And the two different funding sources that staff is proposing here is budgeted transfers to this reserve every year up to a ceiling of 750,000. This is the amount that staff is recommending would be the maximum that we would want to see in this reserve. And just for the purpose of unforeseen situations in our policing contract, sometimes there can be a major incident that would require special investigations, and that would cost extra over and above our contract. So having this $750,000 maximum, it should be adequate reasonably to cover costs for an unusual situation. Another funding source would be actual annual operating surpluses for policing for the contract. So this would be actual police costs net of provincial traffic fine revenue sharing and net of any policing recoveries, i.e. policing recoveries from the IPE, would automatically go into this reserve up to that maximum of 750,000. So the uses can be any one of the three that are shown there for planned funding for annual police operating costs, where the anticipated proceeds the police levy are insufficient to fully fund the function. So currently we are using a small amount from this reserve every year to balance the operating situation for policing. But with the police levy going up every year by policy, we are seeing a slow decline in the amount of reserve funds we're using to balance this function. So for now, we are still using some money from the reserve every year, and that's in the budget. It can also be used for any unusual or unexpected police operating costs, like I mentioned a few moments ago, as well as any unexpected operating deficits where we don't have enough to cover, and we can dip into that reserve to do that. The next bylaw is bylaw 1695. This is the Attainable Housing Statutory Reserve Fund. This reserve was created around the same time that the city partnered with a developer for the development of Heaton Place years ago for the operation of the units at Heaton Place that the city owned. Now that the city does not own those units no longer, the balance that's in that reserve can be used for any kind of affordable or special needs housing or servicing projects that council may want to do in the near future. The only funding source would be budgeted transfers, but historically we haven't transferred any money into that reserve. There's a fairly healthy balance in there right now. The next statutory reserve is the new one. This is the Land Sale Statutory Reserve Fund. Officially, it doesn't exist yet until later on tonight when it is hopefully adopted. This is for the net proceeds of the sale of city-owned land and improvements except for parkland. And it can be used for any capital purpose approved by council, as well as paying off any remaining debt associated with the land and improvements that were sold. And this is again governed by provincial legislation. So moving down to our non-statutory reserves or operating reserves, as these are called. The first one is the budget carryover. This is a vehicle that we use to reserve tax money for projects that weren't started or weren't completed. So leftover money that can be just carried over by 1 year to the following year, and then we rebudget using the funds from those reserves. It's not designed for a long-term funding situation. It's basically just over a year end. The second one is the building inspection operating reserve. Staff is recommending that any actual annual building inspection surpluses go to this reserve up to a maximum of 150,000. That is the amount that staff is recommending would be an adequate maximum for the purposes that are shown on the to the right. So 3 different funding uses. These would be unexpected actual annual building inspection deficits where we can rectify that deficit from this reserve, as well as temporary building inspection service expansion costs. So if we ever had a really busy year where we needed to temporarily hire a second building inspector, we could pay for those temporary costs out of this reserve without having to tap into the tax base. And any other general purpose approved by council. It's pretty open-ended with this one. The next three operating reserves are brand new. We have created those starting in 2025, and they are for the joint services. So essentially what their purpose is any kind of surplus that we see, an operating surplus for the city's share of those operations, they come into these reserves automatically. And then in the future, they can be used for any kind of unexpected deficits in those joint functions as well, and any fire or cemetery or parks and recreation operating purpose as shown. And finally, for accumulated surplus, as mentioned before, this is the default destination for surpluses in the accounting world. These three accounts, council nor staff have created in the accounting world. These are automatically present. And this would be similar to retained earnings in the corporate world, but in the government world, we call it accumulated surplus. So what staff is suggesting is for general water and sewer, this is the other half of actual annual general water and sewer operating surpluses for any given year would go just out of default into these reserves. And the funding uses are pretty open-ended for general as any general purpose by council, and of course, water and sewer. So a bit of a long-winded discussion, but I wanted to make sure that council was aware of all of the intricacies that staff is suggesting for going forward with governing and managing reserve funds responsibly. And again, one of the key issues here is just improving efficiency so that some of the more routine situations can happen automatically if council approves, so that staff doesn't need to come to council every year. Now, actual amounts going into these reserves are still built into the financial planning process, so that would still come across your desks, as you will see next Monday when we go over the budget. That's all I have for now. Thanks.
Thank you, Terry. Councillor Nietzsche.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Terry, thanks for your work on this and bringing us up to date with current practices. So it's great. So just a question for you regarding how this new policy would affect the fire protection when we have our equipment and personnel deployed on provincial deployments. Where would that kind of funding generally be allocated to or within this new policy?
Thank you. I'm assuming you're referring to the recoveries for deployment?
Exactly, yeah.
So when we have deployment through BC Wildfire, generally what we recover is more than what we spend. So there is a surplus there. So what would happen is that would flow into the overall joint service surplus. So for the city's share at year end, what I'm proposing is that because that's an operating function, is that would flow into the new fire operating reserve, like the rest of the surplus for joint fire. Because it's not equipment related, equipment is used for deployment, but the deployment overall is an operating function.
Okay.
It would flow into the new operating reserve.
Okay, so we have flexibility within that policy then. I think in the past, we've used some of that surplus funding to fund new capital equipment. I'm just thinking about one of the water tenders that we purchased. So we have, with council approval, we have flexibility to use that either for operating or for capital within the new policy, correct?
Yes, there would be that flexibility. If council would want to use money from the operating reserve for a capital purpose, it would likely require just a resolution to deviate from policy. But that flexibility is there for sure.
Excellent. Thank you.
Councillor Fowler.
Yes, thank you. Similar to Councillor Nietzsche's question about the fire department, for Parks and Rec, did we not have a reserve in the past that we put our surplus operating funds into that we used for emergency things that broke down?
Thank you. Yes, we did. That is the Parks and Recreation reserve that we have for projects. So that was meant for originally unanticipated major repairs, especially with the buildings on the fairgrounds. I think that's what triggered it many years ago. But that is still there, and we can certainly still use that. That was in the statutory reserve. There was that Parks and Rec reserve that can be used for that purpose, as long as it's a project.
So why wouldn't it just be one reserve?
The one that has been there for a while would be for projects, so that more capital related, because that rolls up into the bylaw which stipulates capital or project type costs, whereas the new one is more for operations. So if we had a year where there was a deficit in our operations, then we can tap into the funds in that operating reserve and not in the capital or project reserve. So we would have two of them.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Martins, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the other part of that is what I would term intentional versus unintentional. So the parcel tax that is applied has to be done through a statutory bylaw. You can't just put it into general operating. So that would be the difference. So that $20 per parcel that Mr. Martins referred to goes into that statutory piece, and then the unintended outcome of the operations is what the other one is used for. We're just showing it clearer now than it was before.
Councillor Drapla?
Thank you, Your Worship. Similar question with water and sewer. Just what's the benefit of having it split between the the statutory reserve and then the accumulated surplus instead of just having it all together?
Thank you. It basically the same type of answer in that the water and sewer reserve that we have right now that we've been using for years is project related. It's capital related. It's attached to a bylaw that is project related. So having an operating reserve will enable the city to tap into that for an operating purpose, again, for an unintended deficit. If we had a deficit for water and sewer, which is possible, then we could tap into that to bring it to zero. So that it's cleaner. Again, like what was mentioned, it's a segregation between unintended and intended.
Anything further? Not seeing anything. I'll put forward, the recommendation is that the proposed new reserve and surplus funds policy 200-11 as presented be approved to replace existing policy 200-11. It'll be moved by Councillor Valstar and seconded by Councillor Todd. We've had a question session. I'll give the opportunity for one more. Nobody's got anything to add. I will call the vote then. All those in favor? And that'll be carried unanimously. Thank you, everybody. And moving along, we'll call on Ms. Weiss regarding commission and committee appointments review.
Thank you, Your Worship. This matter is before you tonight, Mayor and Councillors, for your annual review of your board and commission and committee appointments. Each year you review the appointments to make sure that they all continue to support continuity and regional coordination and appropriate community representation. As you might be aware, Armstrong jointly manages two formalized commissions, Parks and Rec and Fire Services with Spalmachine. Additionally, you serve on a number of community committees and liaison roles. They're discretionary, but still important to you. We met, CAO Seibel and I met with Mr. Mayor last week just to review who's in place where, and it's included in the report. No major issues came up through your mayor, and nothing has come forward from you as a group at this point that we're aware of. We didn't identify any concerns from community groups. We haven't heard back from anybody in that regard, and quite the contrary, we hear that council representation is well suited to where you have placed yourselves. As such, it's our recommendation to maintain the current appointments, but it's up to you if you want to change it, and we can certainly help you through that based on your discussion tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll put forth the recommendation that the existing commission, committee, and board appointments as outlined in the Manager of Corporate Services report dated December 8th, 2025 be maintained for the remainder of the council's terms. Do we have a mover? Councillor Wayner, thank you. Second, Councillor Valstar. And I'll ask if there is any questions. Councillor Drapla.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just noticed that there was an omission of the Armstrong Spalmachine Trail Society on that list. And so currently I'm the council representative and Councillor Wayner is the alternate on that. And so I would propose that we add that back into I know at probably this time last year, we removed representatives from the Trail Society and then they came back as a delegation throughout the year and requested it. And then we reinstated our representation onto that committee or onto that, organization.
Very good. Do we just look at that as an oversight and continue with the original motion with that addition? Is that fair? Councillor Belston, you're good with that?
Absolutely, we can do that. I didn't see that on, and it could have been an oversight,
Yeah,
Mr.
that's-
Mayor.
I believe
But we
that's
can
why, yeah.
absolutely go forward with that. Yeah.
Very good. So it is an existing one as is, and the same members will partake. It was just canceled for a while and then regenerated. So having said that, Councillor Fowler.
Yeah, thank you. I just, it's interesting. I don't know that we've, not very often anyway, in the last 20 years, we've just carried over. But it's a really good thing. And I find that at the regional district when we're doing our committee chairs that about the middle of October, beginning of November, we're already getting requests that specifically some of the libraries and Etsy and so on, that they keep the same representatives because otherwise all SIR is the same thing. Otherwise you're just starting all over again with new people all the time. So this will be appreciated not only by council and mayor, but also by the organizations for sure.
I agree. Thank you for those comments. Yeah, if there's nothing further, then we shall call the vote. All those in favor? And that'll be carried unanimously. And next, 4.3, the Rosedale Intersection Safety Improvement Design. We're going to ask Mr. Seibel to speak on this first, and then we'll get a report from Mr. Ackerman.
Thank you, Worship. So just wanted to have just a couple of opening comments in related to this particular report. You recall at the last council meeting, there was a series of resolutions that were adopted. One of them specifically related to this issue of stakeholder engagement was kind of added on the fly at that meeting. So I wanted to touch on two things. One, in this report, the budget request elements at a high level in terms of scope are listed here, as well as the potential cost. Next week at the introduction of the budget, we're going to have a bit of a discussion about what to do with this one, because this is an unfunded project at this point. So from a prioritization perspective, we'll get into that a little bit more next week. What I wanted to do tonight was to get some clarity on if the project moves forward at some point, what exactly the consultation piece is going to entail, and specifically what are council's expectations in that regard, because as we witnessed at the last meeting, there's obviously those that are opposed to it, and there are those that are in favor of it. And so I don't want to put anybody in a situation that we're doing something that's going to create more problems. And so part of the comments around the consultation in this report is to focus on just what the expectation is, i.e. if we're, and I'm not saying this was the intent from last week, but if the expectation was that we were going to go back and ask the community, that has a potentially different outcome than a targeted consultation related to the specifics of what we're going to put in place at the intersection, if that makes sense. So normally when you do a detailed design, you don't engage the public in the detailed design because that's what the professionals do. It's the precursor to that of, what are we trying to accomplish, what we'd like to see in terms of those improvements. So depending on which direction we head in that regard, there's definitely different outcomes that can happen. So I just wanted to make sure that we had a bit of a conversation so that I was clear as we move forward, so that as Mr. Ackerman is bringing this forward and we deal with this, that if it gets prioritized through the budget process next week, we'll have already kind of dealt with that issue in terms of consultation, because next week's going to be pretty busy just looking at numbers. So that's where this is at, and the outcome of what I'd like to try and get to this evening, Your Worship.
Thank you, Mr. Seibel. Brad, did you want to continue on with your presentation and then we can move forward from there?
Through your worship, I think I can answer some questions in regard to the detailed design, but I think the majority of the discussion will focus around the consultation and clarification on any of the technical components, if that's suitable.
Very good. Well, we won't throw any motions out there at this point in time. We'll open up this floor for some discussion and see where this is going to take us. Councillor Drapla?
Sure. Thank you, Worship. I feel like I should speak first as I was the one that threw that motion out there on the fly. I think my intention wasn't a community forum style engagement. It was coming from the place that we've had this project in place as like a temporary measure for a year. And I think now different targeted stakeholder groups will have some feedback on what that actually means to their kind of day-to-day usage of the intersections. I think we heard from our discussions last time that council is still united on wanting to make sure that safety is a priority. And I think from a community standpoint, we understand that and we're still behind that. The other piece that we're hearing from the community is the difficulty in navigating those turns in the intersection. And I think by including some of those targeted stakeholder groups with what would be some of the bigger vehicles navigating those, I think that accomplishes what I was looking for. It's really just feedback on, hey, we've had this in place for a year. What are some of the challenges? What are not? How can we tweak something, if anything, to make navigation easier while still maintaining safety for the intersections? That's my thoughts.
Thank you, Councillor Weiner.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I think what I brought up as well, I was thinking in similar terms, my main concern was I'm hearing some challenges with some of those stakeholders with, you know, buses, school buses going through. And I think having those consultations, it's maybe some minor adjustments before we actually go to the detailed design. We can iron those out a lot easier than coming back afterwards. And I just wanted to comment, the one that I did mention earlier that's missing from the list is the BC ambulance service. And I'd like to see that included as one of the stakeholders as well.
Thank you, Councillor Weiner. Was it Councillor Nietzsche you wanted to pipe in?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And just to build on Councillor Dropola's comments there, I think that, you know, the rationale and to provide a little bit of clarity to staff is that we've struggled a little bit in the past with two-way communication between the city and kind of key stakeholder groups. And I think on this particular project is a good example of that. And I think that although, you know, from my perspective, this isn't intended to be a rehashing of whether we're going to move forward with this or not. This is simply an opportunity for key stakeholders that are using those intersections to provide some feedback and have some two-way communication so that they can understand the rationale for the public safety component of this. So really, we're not here to determine whether we are or not moving forward with this. You know, I think that has pretty much been determined now. I think it's a matter of ensuring that what we're designing and doing here is workable for some of those key stakeholder groups and protective services in particularly. I mean, we heard, you know, unfortunately, we heard that, you know, at one point, fire services in particular was engaged with, and then we heard from fire services that they hadn't been engaged with. So I think we're kind of backtracking a little bit, which is a good thing. Let's recognize that we need to make sure that we're including them to make sure that those apparatus and stuff can move through those intersections safely, et cetera. But at the same time, safety is still paramount for me. So building on what Councillor Dropola said, we need to ensure that this group is clear and that we're not talking about not doing or doing these things. It's making sure that the design reflects perhaps some of the concerns that they have regarding the way they move through those intersections.
Thank you. Councillor Fowler.
Yes, thank you. I think, you know, I'm pleased to hear the responses so far. One of the things I noticed last week or last meeting was that we didn't have any of the organizations, agencies, businesses that were driving the big trucks that could potentially have trouble navigating those corners. The people in cars and pickups and cycles and all that, I mean, hopefully they can all manage it, but those are the ones that I think we really need to concentrating on hearing from, and that right from the get-go, that's what we had asked about. And so I'm okay to carry on as recommended here.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment that I think our focus is maybe just a wee bit too narrow. These two intersections and touch points were sort of, we were told this is what was going to be tested, repaired, fixed, however we want to describe. But since then, we've had other incidents in the community that are also just as high of a stake. And when we had this discussion last week and we were making our motion, I was sort of the impression that we would look at the community as a whole and not focus just on those two locations, but figure out where our problems are, where our fixes are, where our budget is, and fix the worst ones first, or those that we determine to be the worst. I know Wood Avenue is still a hot topic of discussion, and I don't know if that's any more or any less of a priority than anything along Rosedale. So I just would like, however we advance this, that we look at the whole community, more than just the two intersections that we really didn't have any say in. They got fixed.
Since my light was on. I agree that there's definitely a problem all along Wood Avenue and and up along the Okanagan Street and so on and so forth. But this is the one we've been working on for a while. I'd really love to be able to see this one get done. I think that the Wood Avenue one is kind of in progress with studies and more data being compiled and whatnot. I would be afraid to be changing this recommendation in that it would just delay everything. Personally, I'd like to see these get done, and in the meantime also working on the Wood Avenue. These two intersections were the reasons these two intersections were identified was the pedestrians specifically were having trouble safe crossing and the realignment. So I don't disagree with what you're saying. I just don't want to hold off getting something done. So.
I appreciate that, Councillor Weiner.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I do agree that keeping data moving forward is important. I was question for maybe Brad. We have our traffic safety study and the models and the data incorporated in that. Are we continuing to update that? Is there a way we can continue to roll that forward so we can use that for future intersections?
Yes, Your Worship, it's still somewhat of a live document as we do additional traffic counts and speed movements and that kind of stuff. We incorporate that in and help the decision-making progress where we look at additional studies for improvements. So that is still an ongoing thing and will continue to play out over time based on priorities and feedback.
Thank you. So the next intersection or the next projects that we may look at, we'd have that data to base it on, is what I'm hearing.
That is correct. Yeah.
Councillor Todd.
Thank you, Your Worship. To your point, I think that while these groups are at the table, those questions could be asked at the same time. If they have some major concerns about specific intersections, they could certainly bring them up. We wouldn't have to just be targeted and laser focused on just those two when they're sitting around. We can actually have those conversations.
Councillor Velster.
Yeah, thank you. Just maybe a question for Mr. Seibel. With the consultations, are we like what's the approach of the consultation? Is it going to be like a survey type, or is it going to be like a meeting, or is it going to be a phone call type thing? Just
Thank you, through Your Worship. I think the approach with this one is maybe a bit of a combination of each. So I think part of what needs to be explained is kind of what exists now as it relates to the delineators that are there and what the intention was. Specific to these groups, what we're wanting to know is when we're looking at both the vehicular movement and the pedestrian movement within those intersections that are accompanied there, how their specific vehicles are impacted. So whether it's the fire trucks with length, BC ambulance with their ambulances, the school buses themselves, to understand how those movements are impacted by what exists now. Because if we needed to change where the rolled curb goes, how deep it is, those sorts of things. That's how you would inform that. So it'd be hard to do that in a survey because on some level you got to be able to just show the visuals and talk through it with them. So that's why I said it might be a combination of calls, meetings, something to that effect. Haven't worked out those details yet. I just wanted to make sure we're on the right track with the intent, and I'm kind of hearing that pretty loud and clear, I think, tonight about what the expectation would be as it moves forward. So if that makes.
Yeah, and just a quick follow-up too, like I'm definitely in line with some of the other comments made around the table. I really like the idea of taking the opportunity while we have these experts, their attention, if maybe they could suggest a couple other problem areas that they notice because they drive our streets on the regular, and that could help us prioritize our next projects.
Councillor Todd.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to make sure that we have a real personal approach to this because there is an impression that it's an us and them, and we're the big house on the hill, and we don't have our finger on the pulse of the community. So I think it's very important that it's not just mail something in and we'll look at it because we know best.
Councillor Nietzsche.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and through the chair. Just a question to staff. Just moving off of the engagement piece a little bit, I'm just curious, that $75,000 cost figure, is that just an estimate placeholder for now? It seemed excessive. I'm just wondering if that's just that placeholder right now. And I'm also wondering if the Vision Zero grant funding can be applied to this final design, and we can apply for grants for that through ICBC.
Through your worship, the quote we received is from our engineering consultants as kind of a full scale overview of those intersections. I anticipate the design would come in quite a bit cheaper. We're going to look to retain as much hard infrastructure as we can, but it is getting that detailed survey information to then lay things out and look at what can be salvaged and what improvements are required to increase the pedestrian accessibility and shorten some of those distances. So that's kind of a worst case scenario, and I anticipate we can probably come in well under that budget.
Any further questions?
My follow-up to that though is that design and final design eligible for that Vision Zero grant funding?
Oh, yeah, through your worship, we have expended our Vision Zero grant monies. There is additional intakes that we could look to pursue, but that deadline is rapidly approaching, and it may actually already be closed.
Okay.
The only other comment that I wanted to make was that we're still, and much to the point, I understand the two intersections that have sort of already been buggered up. I get it. We need a fix for that. But we do have larger problems within the community. And I think that our focus should move away. Once again, we do require a bigger picture, and we should be maybe looking at through the lens of playgrounds and parks. It's only a matter of time before we have another injury or pedestrian accident out in front of our park on Pleasant Valley Road with kids trying to get to the pool and poor crosswalk locations and speeding going through there and everything else. And I really think we need a focus that's going to incorporate all of these things, and then we can prioritize them to fix and move them through. And that would just be my recommendation, is that we have to look at this as a big picture. And we've invested a lot of time and a lot of emotion on two intersections that don't work well, and we don't know how to fix yet. And we still have other problems. And I'd like to focus on everything, take a 1,000-foot level instead of focusing just on those two. But that's just where I stand at this point.
If I could make a comment though, Your Worship, I mean, that is exactly what the study did, is it looked at the community as a whole, and the experts have set a list of priorities and those intersections that need initial treatment. And I think what staff are saying is that they're going to be looking at those based on the priorities that were, that were recommended in that plan. So I think we are moving forward with that. I'm not quite sure what your point is there, to be honest with you. To me, that is exactly what we're doing. And those two intersections that we're currently dealing with are the ones that were identified by the experts as being the two most hazardous ones for now. And I think we are advancing, moving forward with those other ones, and they'll come in time. So I'm not quite sure what the point is there.
I might not necessarily agree with your comments, just in the fact that based on what information, how many MVAs have occurred at an intersection, or how many speeders we have going through a location. And these are all encompassing. I think we had very, very little information to base our original study on. What we got isn't what we asked for. I continue to suggest that was thrust upon us with that grant money. And I just think we need to look at it from a more all-encompassing approach. So that's,
Well, with all due respect, Your Worship, I disagree. And the fact that either we trust our experts and our opinions or we don't. And that's not our role as elected officials to be getting into the minutia of that. Either we do trust staff and we do trust our experts, or we don't. And I'm sorry you feel that way, but I don't think it's our role as high-level policymakers to be trying to get into the weeds on this issue. We have a report done by experts, done by engineers, and I think we need to follow those recommendations and the recommendations of staff.
Well, I mean, we can obviously agree to disagree. I think there's more information out there that we haven't looked at, but that's neither here nor there at this point in time. I don't know which motion we would like to present. We have a number of options. Mr. Seibel?
Thank you, Your Worship. So based on what I heard, the option that's listed there, the recommended option, might be appropriate with the addition of BC Ambulance to that list for consideration to start.
All right, then we'll start with this approach, that this stakeholder consultation process be a targeted approach with representation from the fire department, the RCMP, the active transport experts, the trucking community, and the school district, along with British Columbia Ambulance Service. And that would be the motion for the stakeholder group moving forward. Moved by Councillor Todd, second by Councillor Drapla. Any further discussion? Not seeing any then, we will call the vote. All those in favor? And that'll be carried. And next up, I believe, the land sale reserve fund bylaw. So we have had 3 readings on this. Am I required to read this all out for the report time, Shanta? Sorry, yes, no?
I'm sorry, Your Worship, and CAO Seibel, just because it's had its 3 readings by council already, it is just up for adoption without a staff report, as is our typical practice. And so just the adoption resolution for consideration, Your Worship.
All right, so we'll be looking to adopt this land reserve fund bylaw number 1945-2025. Looking for a mover, Councillor Drapla, seconded by Councillor Fowler. Any questions? All those in favor? And this will be carried unanimously. Thank you. And now we'll be looking to move to an in-camera session. The council proceed to an in-camera pursuant to section 90, subsection I, section G of the community charter, litigation or potential litigation affecting the municipality. Have a mover? Councillor Drapla, second Councillor Wayner. All those in favor? Carried, and we'll take a 5-minute recess and reestablish with Councillor Nietzsche. Thank you.
Councillor Nietzsche, you can just stay on the line there and we'll get started when we're ready.